In this video, we will learn how to graph a parabola. In particular, f of x is equal to 2x squared minus 4x minus 6. We'll start by finding the vertex by completing the square. In order to complete the square, we're going to first factor out the coefficient of x squared. Then we're going to take half of the coefficient of x, and then we're going to square it. The third step is to add that number, subtract the number, and factor. Let's identify the coefficient of x squared. It happens to be 2. We're going to factor out the 2 for only the first two terms. Once we factor out the 2, that means you're dividing by 2 to the coefficient. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, so you get 1x squared. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2, and that's why we get negative 2x. And we don't factor out the 2 for the negative 6. We leave it outside the parentheses. Once you have the 2 factored out, you identify the coefficient of x, and the coefficient of x is negative 2. Now you take half of negative 2, which is negative 1. Then you're going to square it. We're going to now add the number that we just squared, which is 1. And the reason why we add that 1 is so that we can factor it and get a perfect square. So the first 3 terms, when we factor, will give you a perfect square. Let's factor it. So you look at x squared, x times x gives you x squared. And negative 1 times negative 1 gives you positive 1, but double check to make sure that when you multiply diagonally, so negative 1 times x is negative 1x, negative 1 times x gives you another negative 1x, and when you add the two diagonal products, you're going to get this middle term right here. Here's where majority of the students will make a mistake. Okay, what do we do with the negative 1? Are we going to add the negative 1 to the negative 6, or do we do something else with it? Okay, here is the negative 1 I was referring to right here, next to the negative 6. Now, majority of students will add the negative 1 to the negative 6 and get negative 7. Now that is incorrect. Because the negative 1 is still inside the parentheses, you need to multiply it to the 2, because 2 is multiplied to everything inside the parentheses. So if you want to take it out, you got to multiply it to the 2. Okay, and 2 times negative 1 is equal to negative 2, and that's what you're going to be left with. Part B, determine the y-intercept, use any method. By definition, the y-intercept happens to be the y value when x is equal to 0. So you plug in 0 into all the x values that appear in the equation. And then you work it out, and you'll be left with y is equal to negative 6. Next, we're going to determine the x-intercepts, okay, first by factoring. The x-intercepts, by definition, are the x values when y is equal to 0. So if you plug in 0 into y, you get this equation. First step in factoring is to factor out a common factor, and as you can see, they have 2 in common, so you factor out the 2. And then you factor like you normally would. You look for how you get the first term. X times x gives you x squared. Negative 3 times 1 gives you negative 3. You multiply diagonally to get the middle term, which is negative 2x. Part D, determine the x-intercepts by using the quadratic formula. Note that the answer that you get using the quadratic formula should be the same as the answers you got by factoring. We start off by plugging 0 into y. You can only use the quadratic formula when the equation is equal to 0. The first step you want to do is actually simplify the equation. First, we're going to factor out the 2, like we did before, and divide by 2 on both sides. We try plugging in the a, b, c values into the quadratic formula. The most common problem you'll run into is multiplying the negative 4, 1, and negative 3, or in other words, the negative 4ac term. Okay, the students will most likely make a mistake with the signs.
I insist negative 4ac is negative 12.
So if you add the 4 and the 12, you're going to get 16. Now, whenever you get a perfect square, you need to simplify it. Square root of 16 is 4, so you're going to end up with 2 plus or minus square up 4 over 2. Your solution will branch off into 2 parts. If you add 2 and 4, you're going to get 6. 6 divided by 2 will give you 3. And then 2 minus 4 gives you negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 gives you negative 1. We will skip part E in this video, but it will be part of your final. Okay, you make some observations about the x-intercepts and the relationship between the vertex. Just look at your work, look at your graph, and draw some conclusions.